We care about connection. Connecting technology, connecting solutions, connecting you. We're developing an ecosystem for transportation professionals that improves every facet of moving freight. Whether you need to improve safety, efficiency, or compliance, Trimble has you covered with telematics and fleet management, route optimization, asset maintenance, and transportation management. Wherever you're headed, your journey starts with Trimble.
Welcome back to Loaded and Rolling. I'm Thomas Watson. It's fall. It's flannel season. Let's see if we can scoot this over. Where's my little FreightWaves logo? There we go. We got the logo up. We're fixing the clothes. I normally have the pullover. We're kicking it real. If you're not watching this, we are back to wearing the flannel. It is that time of the year, just like pumpkin spice lattes, but instead, yours truly is wearing different clothes. Yep, no more blue pullover. Alan, you have the blue pullover, though. We're going to be having our guest, Alan Adler, in a minute. Going to be talking a little bit about truck tech, which is something that Alan covers, and it's important because there's been a lot of recent moves in the market. So, Freightliner released the new Cascadia. There's talk of the X15 engine by Cummins, used in Kenworth. I know I'm going through the various corporate nest eggs, but a lot of talk about that. A new engine type, new types of alternative fuels. We've got hydrogen trucks. We still have the battery electric situation and some moves in the autonomous space. So there's a lot going on. And if you ask some analysts and folks, EPA's Phase 3 ruling comes out on 2017. Model year 2027 is going to be impacted. So we're kind of seeing this race right now to see, which fuel source is either going to win, gain market share. We're going to stick with what we have, or we're just going to add a lot of DEF and just make sure that we have twice as much urea for the diesel trucks. But we're going to bring in the expert here. Alan has had more travels and got to talk to a lot more people than I have. He's very well versed in the space, award-winning journalist, as well as host of Truck Tech, the newsletter and podcast. Alan, pleasure to have you back on. Feel like there's a lot going on. See if we got Alan. Alan, can you hear me? Am I coming? Oh, okay. We'll get him in there in a minute here. But so one of the stories we're going to be diving in a minute is the recent changes to the Freightliner. So if you don't know about it, it's the Cascadia. Now, we used to joke at US Express, the Cascadia was really great because it was the most bare bones you could get, but also the interior was made out of a hard reinforced plastic. So when the drivers got angry, they would try to trash the Cascadia, but they couldn't because the plastic, it was like way too made. So it wasn't like a Peterbilt or a Kenworth or, it wasn't like one of those that you were excited about. But the Freightliners had a really solid powertrain, and so you could actually get those things moving around, and they worked. But the issues, of course, governors aside, a lot of the drivers I knew also liked the Volvos, and they would try to go after that. But the Volvo had this weird lane control system problem, and so it would sound like it was constantly going off as the lidars were picking up cars. I hope they fix that now. But so recently, the best-selling Class 8 truck is undergoing a makeover. So this is one of the cool things. It's coming to market after the current one called the new Cascadia, which was 2019. So we've got a different, I guess, the new Cascadia. The original one came out back in 2007. And so they have sold over 1 million trucks since it debuted in 2007. And one of the big things is you get a new hood with intelligent headlights. That's right, folks. So the exterior A-pillar deflector. That's a pretty good one. It's got new intelligent LED headlights. So durable in impact. They have de-icing and defogging. Nobody wants fogged up headlights. I should have got a picture of this on there, but also additionally, braking assist. So when you talk about, a lot of folks are talking about the AEBs and the mandates, the automated emergency braking. It actually has an active brake assist, applies when it detects it. So we're having some active lane assist, driver protection controls. And so, that's one of the cool, interesting things, as well as a rollaway protection. And so making sure that the electric parking brake automatically applies when the driver leaves the seat or opens the door, so that way you don't accidentally run into stuff. So there's a lot of cool things on there. I think one of the big things folks need to take into consideration is that, while we report on, see if we get we'll get more information about the different fuel sources. It's not as if the diesel trucks have been sleeping, or it's not as if they're asleep at the wheel. And so one of the cool things is that, and what we'll be talking about in a minute when we bring on Alan, is that there's a lot of cool stuff in the tech, but also the old reliables like the diesel engine. They're also teaching an old dog new tricks. And so let's see if we have Alan back on. Alan, can you hear me, sir?
I can hear you, Thomas. How are you?
Doing well. I was trying to paraphrase this article. I think this is really cool. You wrote about the new 5th generation Cascadia, so I figured we'll start with diesel. What's going on in the space? Then we'll go on to electric and natural gas. But old reliable, tell us about this release, because it seems really cool that they're adding in a lot of things that when you read about automatic braking and all these other stuff, well, it's already coming pre-installed.
Right. I think what you have to look at with Freightliner, first of all, this is your market leaders, roughly 40% of the Class 8 market. And so you can't let it go too long without updating. One of the competitors, Volvo, of course, is out with an all new ground up, 90% new truck this year, their VNL long haul sleeper. And, they are looking at, really big changes there, because when you start with a clean sheet of paper, you can do a lot more. I think in Freightliner's case, they're doing enough to keep things fresh. I use the word nifty, which is not a word I use every week, but there's some nifty stuff in the truck. I heard you talking. I thought I heard you talking about some of it. And those are nice enhancements. Those are things that, they say were, kind of customer requests. And so they did that. Probably the biggest one that you'd notice is the fact that, you don't have the ketchup and mustard air hose noise anymore, because they've made that electronic by tying it into the electronic park brake. So you don't have that big, kind of bang and swish or bang and hiss sound that you get when you set or release the brakes. That's a big deal, I think. And, that's one. I think something from the car business, automatic lock and unlock of the doors. There's one fleet out there, I won't name them, who said they spend $2 million a year getting those trucks unlocked that are locked on the road or inadvertently locked and that kind of thing. So, this is something that actually carries over from the car business and OnStar, but it's something that is also, kind of peace of mind for the driver too. They're not going to get locked out of the vehicle. I think that, some of the other things that they're looking at, they were more or less minor, because this truck is still pretty modern. When they brought the 4th version out in 2019 for 2020, it really did set some new standards, especially in terms of assisted driving, safety driving, what's called ADAS, partial autonomous driving or automated driving. Then they've enhanced some of that in this version.
And I think it's interesting. I do wonder, model year 2027 is coming up with the additional restrictions on the engine. Is this kind of one of those things where we're going to do a quick refresh, kind of like the iPhone, the half step, and then we're going to wait and unveil something for that model year 2027 with the additional stuff? Or is this platform set up in such a way that we can just stack on an extra def and, call it a day with the new emissions rate?
Well, I don't know what the Detroit engines are going to look like, but I think they'll be covered at least for the interim, because they do offer the Cummins X15, and the X15 has already been certified for greenhouse gas emissions in 27. So that will be available in the 2026 models, as well as the Cummins 15-liter natural gas engine, which we've written and had a lot of stuff about on our shows. I think that in both cases, those may or may not be stopgap measures. I mean, ultimately, there's going to be a new Detroit engine, I think, that will account for this, because diesel is going to be the primary, despite all the efforts that Daimler does around electrification and their goals of, sort of net zero carbon in their major markets by 2039. Diesel pays the bills, and so they're going to pay a lot of attention to that for the near term. And I think this is this is the step toward that. We will probably see a new engine before too long, but I don't see them announcing it anytime soon. Will it be ready for 2027? I would have to think so, but they may be hedging their bets, Thomas, because if you say, well, we'll just offer the Cummins, in the near term, and wait and see what happens, because if these regulations get pushed out or something like that, depending on the election, you could see that happen. You've got California to deal with, but maybe the whole country doesn't go to the present EPA rules.
So there's a game theory because I'm not as familiar. I got the ride on the excellent work, by the way, riding on the X15 and stuff. I'm still riding the pieces. It was fascinating because Cummins was talking about how they're working with Kenworth. They're releasing this platform, and then the headers are what we can switch around, and the diesel headers and stuff now meets the criteria. So if you're Daimler, I'm assuming they have their own engine, but they're going to wait and say, okay, well, I'm going to offer customers a Cummins engine and a Cascadia, and then if it turns out by 2027 or 2028 that I don't have to do as much work, then maybe I'll release my own block. Is that kind of how the OEM versus the engine maker dynamic?
Well, sort of. I think in Freightliner's case, they're holding off, right? They're not doing anything on their own, or at least not announcing anything on their own right now. But you did see both Volvo and PACCAR, Peterbilt and Kenworth, come with California engines, if you will, for 2024. They're actually 2025 models, but that gets very complicated. But they have a version that will meet California standards for 2024. And what that does is allow them to sell in the state. The issue for everybody is, you want to hopefully stay away from two sets of standards. And there is an agreement in place between the engine manufacturers and California to basically go with a single standard in 2027. But again, you've got to get through an election and see what's going to happen from that. But at this point, two of the makers did go ahead and come up with an engine that's qualified for California's emissions. And then, that is one more step. And I guess you could, adopt something like that for a certain part of your fleet, the part of the fleet that's going to run in California, for example. You'd go ahead and maybe bring those in, grandfather them in, presumably for 2027. But I think at this point, it's just so early. We're seeing some pre-buy already, this happens every time you have an emissions change, obviously. And, we're seeing some pull ahead on sales and things like that, and, things that will, be grandfathered in. But I think that, there's just too many uncertainties about what we think we know for 2027.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about some certainties I've seen. Nikola, and then we've also had Tesla recently talking about it. There's a battle on the electric side. So while diesel and a few other different types are going, we're showing some early signs. You recently wrote in your Truck Tech newsletter that they laid off 15% of their workforce, or 135 workers. Talk about the Nikola situation, because it looks like they're getting orders, but at the same time, from the electric space, it seems as though it's very much limited in terms of applications, as I understand it.
Well, and in one way, it's kind of sad to see. You've got Nikola's moved 235 total hydrogen-powered fuel cell trucks since the end of last year. That's pretty neat on one level, but the problem is it costs them way too much to make them. They don't have any ready source of capital or money. Nobody's going to lend them any money, so they've continued to basically make their stock available. They did what usually or often is a death knell for a company recently when they did a 1 for 30 stock exchange, which is called a reverse split. And essentially what that does is it artificially boosts the price of the stock, doesn't really do anything to the underlying value. But usually what happens when you see a company do this, it's usually a desperate play to stay listed on either the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. And, Nikola had to do this. They were down to about 30 cents a share. Since they've done it, they're actually now under 15 cents a share on a split adjusted basis. So time is running out. That was what we wrote really last week. It wasn't just the layoffs. That was just one more thing. I mean, I think we use the term, kind of burning the furniture for warmth, because they are running out of money and they're running out very quickly and nobody's coming to their rescue. The other issue I think that's more fundamental for Nikola, Thomas, is that they do not really have a technological marvel there. They assemble a lot of other people's stuff, a Bosch fuel cell, Proterra batteries, an Iveco truck. So, they've got some IP certainly, but it's not the kind of thing that makes them a really strong candidate to get purchased by somebody and incorporated into another thing. They sold they sold their plant and leased it back. So, they're really running out of options over there, and pretty quickly. For the longest time, I kept telling people like Dooner, I would say, you just can't count these guys out. Well, we're getting close to having to make that call here pretty soon, and we'll see if they can pull it off. But it certainly doesn't look promising at all, despite being the first and really only truck maker to have a fuel cell truck in market.
And that's what I was curious about, because even for fuel cells and even the electric space, if we don't have a Nikola, where else will you buy it? I've seen some of the Tesla stuff, but they don't have a PR team. So you can't really ask them the real details. If you've noticed that, because I still have some gripes, apparently just Twitter posters can somehow say, because they showed up at some event, who's in the electric space for battery and who would take up for hydrogen? Who would we go to in the event it doesn't exist anymore?
Well, you won't go to Tesla for hydrogen because if you remember, and you may remember that Elon Musk called them fool cells as an FOOL. So he's not a fan of hydrogen. So I would not look for him. You do have another startup also kind of struggling financially called Hyzon that is now building a 200 kilowatt single fuel cell in the Chicago area, and they will retrofit Cascadias with those. Again, it's something that doesn't have a long tail to it, Thomas. I mean, in terms of really being able to, fuel the trucks and things like that. And, I think in Nikola's case, they've just bit off so much because it's not just the trucks. They're trying to provide fueling infrastructure typically through mobile refueling rather than stationary stations, which are horrifically expensive. I mean, we saw what Daimler did with a standalone station, a pilot station that they have over in Germany a few weeks ago. And that is an enormous undertaking, to get that in there. And then, of course, you've got to have, the way to make the hydrogen and get it there and things like that. So I think that, we're going to find that with Nikola and really everybody that's in there now, it's so early. You can get some onesies and twosies kind of success. But when you're spending more than $1 million to make a truck that you're selling for less than 400,000, you could do the math. It's just not going to work out long term.
And I like your talk about long tail. I was talking to your reading your interviews, talking about whether even natural gas is going to be a long tail. It feels like we are in a stage where it hasn't been decided, unless you ask the diesel folks who still feel, obviously, we're still king here. Is this really kind of an arms race right now? What are you looking at in the next 5 years? Are we jockeying, or is there something where if I had to place my bet and I'm at the metaphorical races, what horse should I put it on?
Well, I don't think you're going to discount, when I say discount diesel, I don't think you can count out diesel in any meaningful way for another 20 years, 15 years, whatever, you pick your number. But I think with natural gas, what you've got is it's kind of a historic penetration rate of 1% to 2%. Okay. And the 12-liter natural gas engine that Cummins sells and really is the only one in market, it's okay for certain use cases, but it's not going to get you across the hills in Colorado and places like that. It's not really a long haul engine. Now what they've come with, and I was up in Jamestown, New York a few weeks back and got a chance to see it, is this 15 liter. You talk about the headers or the tops of the engine being different. This is part of Cummins' fuel agnostic program. First one out the gate is the natural gas, followed by the diesel, which will be GHG or greenhouse gas compliant. And then late in the decade, they're looking at doing a hydrogen internal combustion engine that would run on hydrogen fuel. So they may do other things, but those are the three they've talked about. And I think that, the idea that the internal combustion engine is going to be with us for a long time is probably even more relevant than diesel is. I think at this point, diesel remains the king. All the infrastructure is there. That's, price is fungible, right? But I think in the case of natural gas, what Cummins has come up with is a competitive engine to run against diesel. In terms of, you're not going to get the same fuel economy on it because it burns hotter and therefore, it doesn't have the energy properties of diesel. But it is something that from if you use petroleum-based natural gas, you're probably saving 20% greenhouse gas. If you go to renewable natural gas, you could be, negative net zero, a term that we throw around a lot at FreightWaves. But it really is true. On dairy waste, that's like 300% better than diesel. And therefore, your emissions profile improves a great deal. The reason to do this engine, though, is, it's economics because, renewable natural gas is not near as expensive as diesel. And you do get a payback that's going to work out. And you're also going to be able to meet the 2027 NOx requirements in the greenhouse gases. So there's a number of reasons to do it. And you now have an engine at 500 horsepower and 1,850 pound-feet of torque that's good enough to compete with a diesel engine.
I like the instance of the dairy farms. They had their own, they collected the cow waste and they turned it into the stuff that fueled the trucks. I mean, I want to throw this out there here. We got about 5 minutes left. A lot of the environmental groups and stuff complain about cow farts and cow methane and cow fecal matter. So you're telling me that I could turn that into just collect it and I could just turn it into a fuel source.
And they do. And Thomas, they do that. There are certain farms that do that make fuel, and then they have a digester and they make the fuel and they provide the fuel to someone. We've got two companies coming up in our 5th episode of this natural gas series we've been doing with Hexagon Agility, where we talk to Opal Fuels and we talk to clean energy fuels. These are two promoters really of natural gas, and one is focused more on public stations and the other on sort of behind the fence activity, for a fleet. So this idea that there is an infrastructure for it and there's a potential, according to Clean Fuel Energy anyway, there's a potential of 40 billion gallons of renewable natural gas out there. California is like 98% RNG now. The rest of the country is 70 or 80%. So when you're talking about natural gas, now it's still a relatively small number compared to diesel availability, but you do find a real interest in the renewable natural gas side of this.
My theory is, instead of having the farm subsidies to grow wheat and soy and corn that we use for ethanol, we should do poop subsidies for the cows and then turn it into the gas. And then I can have cheaper steaks. Take that, Argentina. I'm just tossing it out there.
They told me to be careful of talking to you on your own show. I think, there it is.
Right here,
come up at some point.
But
they're actually promised. In all seriousness, there are some incentives for natural gas trucks. They're not as generous as electric and things like that. The question I have and have asked many people in this space is natural gas a transitional kind of fuel, or does it have, to overuse the term we've been talking about, long tail? And I think there's people like Mike Roth. I interviewed him the other week down in Alabama for he's with the North American Council for Freight Efficiency. He seems to think there probably is a place for natural gas with this, big bore engine, with this Cummins engine that might be long term. It may not be something where you're just doing it till you get to electric, battery electric. So we'll have to see. But I think it's all in there. I think it all has a place. Really hard to pick winners. I mean, obviously your clubhouse leader has and will remain diesel. Is battery electric going to make it in the Class 8 space? I think that's a question mark. It's clearly making its way in the medium duties, though, where you can already pencil out parity with diesel and with gasoline. So, I think that's where you want to watch for your real penetration is going to be in the medium duty space, more than the Class 8, long haul truck. There's just not a great case to be made for long haul with electric at this point, because you don't have the energy density, and the more batteries you add, the less cargo you carry. So, even though in Europe we're starting to see some 300 and 400 mile ranges on a single charge, that's being accomplished with more batteries. And it's because of things like electronic axles that allow packaging of those batteries. And, you can get a little closer. I mean, Tesla is the only one with a semi that really did a ground up truck and allowed for the batteries that they needed. They also have a pretty nifty, there's that word again. They have a pretty nifty battery in their 4680 cells. So, it's something that I think you've got to watch for, but you just don't have that breakthrough yet in energy density that's going to make electric go for a long haul truck.
Got about a minute-ish left. Any breakthroughs you think about, or as you're talking to, is there anything on the horizon to watch?
Well, we didn't talk much about autonomy, and I don't think 1 minute's going to do it for us. But we do know that Xiaodi Hao is back, the co-founder of Too Simple. He's back with his own company now, so it'll be interesting. I mean, we're having this battle between which kind of AI is workable. Is it end to end like Elon Musk and Xiaodi Hao and people like that talk about without cameras, or do we need the lidars and things like that? So that's something that's going to play out over time. But, in that space, I'm still watching Aurora. I think Aurora's got a nice, solid go-to-market strategy and a good partner in Continental. So definitely worth watching there.
We'll devote another episode to it. I got distracted on the cow farts, Alan. I apologize, but we're going to make money off of it. Running out of time. Folks want to learn more. Check out the next Truck Tech. See the podcast. Tell us where to find out more.
Okay. Wednesdays at 3 is the streaming time on the YouTube, FreightWaves YouTube channel for Truck Tech. And then, of course, it goes into the playlist. Tomorrow we'll be back on the Volvo VNL again, talking about sort of back end and service contract that they're offering that they've enhanced now with, I don't like to throw AI around, but there's probably some of that in there. I think the idea is that it's something that, they're trying to persuade their customers that there is a real value to aligning the maintenance with the truck rather than doing it on their own. So that's tomorrow's episode on FreightWaves.
Looking forward to it. Alan, thank you so much. I'm out of time. I hear the music playing, but don't worry if you're joining us. We'll be back on demand, YouTube, Apple, Spotify. Tuesdays, 2 p.m. Eastern. Catch the show live. Sign up for the newsletter. Thursdays at 2 p.m. I somehow lined it up. It worked out. Join us next week. We'll do it live.